Good day, everyone. My name is Rebecca Lilly for the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Global Electricity Reforms, What, Where, Next? We are grateful to Taras Jamaz and Rabindra Nepal for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations, along with a host of other products and services you can find at our website at www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for our speakers, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window and type your question. We've allocated time at the end of the webinar and read and answer them. And now I would like to introduce you to Taras Jamaz. He is the director of Copenhagen School of Energy Infrastructure and endowed professor of energy economics at the Department of Economics, Copenhagen Business School. Taras, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Let me just share my slides here. Yes, thank you again. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. It's a great pleasure to be with you. We are thankful, me and my good colleague and friend, Dr. Rabindra Nepal, to this for this opportunity has been given to us by David Williams. Approached us a few months ago and said, why don't you give a seminar on global electricity reforms? Mostly inspired by our Energy Journal paper of 2017 that apparently it's been well received, and if we can build on that and get to the to the state of the art and the state of the affairs. So Dr. Nepal and myself, we have been looking at this space for a good number of years. And I have listed some of our work on energy sector reforms, and in particular electricity sector reforms, since 2017. We have done a few more actually. So this is one of our pet subject areas, and we are just going to touch upon some examples and some cases of reforms, and also to some extent with a view of what's going on around us in these days. And to us, these are also a continuation, or what we are doing in response to the current crisis in some parts of the world. It's a continuation of what of the reforms essentially that we need to reform the reforms and even further reforms of them. So without further details, we have a simple program for you. First, it's about the introduction of the 1999s. So we go to the beginning of the time where the reforms were introduced, and then we have some cases that we cover the UK, Australia, and Asia, and our latest work on Papua New Guinea and Nepal, and so on. So a selection of different parts of the world, and then we try to get into the discussion of what is it that we have learned after 30 some years of experience with these reforms, and here you actually have Dr. Nepal covering these topics, and then we move to merit order effects, and then we go back to see where is it that where we are at the moment, and the current possible issues, and perhaps some of the ways forward. So I go to essentially to the basics. If you go back to 1990, when I was a student myself in energy economics, and I was reading about these reform issues in Norway and in the UK, that they were toying with these new ideas of restructuring energy sector, and in particular after the gas, also electricity sector. What was happening at that time was that, within a few years, these reforms were sort of spread to many parts of the world and so on. But what was the reason? We had both developed countries and developing countries adapting and warming up to this to the reform model, market-based liberalization of the energy sectors. Developed countries, the issues were excess capacity, the sort of cost, some of the wrong technologies being used, being costly, and so overbuilt, and capacity that was not being used, even overestimation of demand, the inefficiency of the stock, or inefficient use of it. And there was popular demand for lower prices on the accounts of industrial competition and so on. So at the same time, and then another point that was that was a sort of issue was the direction of subsidies in developed countries. Mostly, the subsidies were going from, in many countries, from households towards the industrial sector. But in developing countries, the issue was capacity shortage as opposed to excess capacity in developed economies. And then it was the burden of subsidies on public accounts and public finances. Quality service was low. If there was a service, high losses and theft. Access was not complete, was very poor in many parts of the world, and so on. And the capital constraints by the sort of governments, when the sectors needed to expand very sort of quickly. For example, in many developing countries, we were sort of looking at economic rates of GDP growth rates of 6-7% or so a year, and this means almost like doubling the capacity every 13 years or something like that. It says something about the magnitude of this. And then so these were sort of the internal and also some of the external sort of drivers. But what was it that these countries were looking at? This is the sort of what I call electricity liberalization 101, or the generic model that became almost sort of the input to those in order to solve those problems. These are very well known, and you are all very well familiar with the key components of a classical kind of reform, or a full menu of reform that consisted of vertical separation, competition in generation, competition in retail, and then incentive or regulation of transmission and distribution networks, establishment of independent regulation, price and subsidy reforms prescribed by many of us as economists and so on, and then the sort of controversial issue of privatization. Some consider this as optional, some consider it as a sort of integrated part of the sort of necessary part of the sort of the reforms. So this is what's on the menu. Different countries did different things with this, or they adopted different parts of it, and they were more successful in implementing some aspects of it more than the others also. But this was what everybody was looking at: developed countries and developing countries, and they saw the solution. So they could see the solution to their problems within the lens of this generic model. And then in terms of the outputs they were hoping for, they were looking for a macroeconomic sort of output in terms of efficiency improvement, reduction of subsidies, lower prices, better quality of service. At macro level, they were looking for better economic growth and more sort of equity in terms of sort of access and availability of energy, and also they wanted the markets to serve sort of environmental and climate sort of objectives. And at the same time, and they wanted, we all wanted in more innovation in the energy sectors, which were lagging behind most of the other sectors of the economies, even other manufacturing industries, also. And then so I mentioned the inputs, and these were the outputs, the expected outputs from the reforms. One of the areas that we failed and became a decisive sort of difference between success and failure was that the reform inputs and outputs we discovered very quickly, or within a few years of implementing the reforms, that these are linked through institutional factors. So institutional factors were the deciding elements in terms of translating the inputs, which is the reform, into successful outputs. This was one of the areas that we neglected, actually, that the devil is in the detail, and that detail is the institutional endowment and institutional factors. Also, so that was the kind of the history. So I want to fast forward to where we are. This is a very recent report by a very excellent piece of work by Compass Lexicon, and it just shows that suddenly, this was where we started, and then suddenly we find our reforms being severely challenged by the current energy crisis. And here, for example, we see that different member countries in the EU adopting a number of different kind of policies, from cash, from taxes to price caps to price controls, and retail tax reliefs, and this is just a simple characterization. There is a very wide variety of policies and responses that member countries have adopted. But one of them, again, comparing developed and developing countries, perhaps you can say, in order to avert the worst impacts of this crisis in the developed world, we are actually adopting many of those measures that we were telling developing countries after the reforms, not to do. So we are doing exactly, many of those same policies in terms of subsidies, price controls, and intervention in the markets, and price caps, and all those kind of things. So if there is one lesson in this, is that we should be more understanding of the issues and the conditions, the special conditions of the poorest countries and developing economies. Then I like to the last slide that I use. I like to point out the case of United Kingdom. It's been for many of us. It's been the source of not inspiration, but source of ideas. We have been looking into the UK. What is the next thing? What are they doing now? Because we had the first the pool market, and then the contract markets came. Incentive regulation of networks, benchmarking, it all came from there also. But even in a rather imaginative reforming country, that being the UK, we are facing a number of interesting issues. These are all challenging the standard reform model that we have been getting used to. So those bold points at the bottom of this slide, they just list some of them. So it's the price caps and direct support that is part of the policy that the government is supporting the households and vulnerable consumers. The issue of windfall tax on wind and solar, and also nuclear. Actually, this was introduced last night, late last night. It's all over the news. It was in the coming, and it came after the government failed to agree on a contract for differences with the industry and so on. But this follows on an earlier windfall tax on oil and gas companies, with some tax credits attached to it and so on. Then one of the the other new ideas is the establishment of an electricity system operator. Not only unbundling, but legal separation of a system operator. And then the other ideas on the table at the moment are a new nuclear capacity, for example, how they should be built and supported. Regulatory asset-based models are being considered, which would be some kind of innovation in a post-reform era, and then the establishment of a new body called the Future System Operator, which is expected to be in operation in about a year and a half from now, which will take over some of the sort of planning, long-term planning the duties of the system operator going forward. And one of the other sort of new areas is that, again, within a year and a half or so, there would need to be some district heating system sort of regulation coming. So challenges by no means we are finished with the reforms 30 years on. And the more we do, the more it comes up and so on. And there is one thing that we need to sort of, there are some subtle lessons for the market design for us these days, as the European Union decided after the Corona, after we got the positive demand shock for energy in Europe, some countries stated that there's nothing wrong with the market design because market design did not cause the post-Corona crisis. But another way of looking at it is that but it didn't prevent it either. And now things have changed. We went from positive demand shock to a negative supply shock, and that requires different kind of policies and measures. And here we are. So at this point, I leave the floor to my colleague, Dr. Nepal. Ravindra, please.
Thank you, Taras. Oh, what happened to the slide? Oh, all right. Okay. All right. So thank you, Taras, for your very kind introduction. And hello, everyone. It is nearly 1:20 a.m. here in Australia, so you might find me mumbling at times, but I still think that's a Pareto improvement to falling asleep. So yeah, thank you for participating in today's seminar. So let me start with the case of Australia. So Australia established the wholesale electricity market in 1998. So it did so by interconnecting the 5 regional markets in the eastern jurisdictions, comprising the electricity markets in New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, Victoria, and eventually Tasmania. So the national electricity market name is an energy-only market. So the wholesale electricity price is based on offers by generators to the market at particular volumes and prices. And energy-only market is inherently very volatile. So therefore, there is a market price cap of 15,500 megawatt hour and a market price floor of negative 1,000 mega per megawatt hour. The Australian Energy Regulator regulates the networks based on incentive regulation in the form of revenue caps. The market is vertically integrated in a sense. The big 3, AGL Energy, Origin Energy, and Energy Australia, have a combined market share of around 63% in retail and 50% in generation. And also the retail electricity prices are still regulated in Victoria, the Australian Capital Territory, Tasmania, and regional Queensland. So some of the major concerns facing the Aussie national electricity market relates to the rising prices of factor inputs. So even pre-crisis, the wholesale electricity prices were rising in Australia, and primarily due to fundamental changes in supply issues such as coal-fired plant shutdowns and higher input costs for generators, especially the rising coal prices between 2015 and 17 was already a grave concern facing the Australian electricity market. Okay, the gas prices more than doubled between 2015 and 17. So in fact, in retrospect, you can consider the current crisis facing the Australian electricity market a perfect storm in the making. And in terms of the market failing to deliver the energy policy goals around security of supply. Okay, that was evident from the suspension of the South Australian electricity market in 2016. And this was actually the second market suspension to have occurred in Australia since the commencement of the national electricity market in 1998. Okay, so in the ASEAN, different countries implemented different reform steps at different time periods. Malaysia amended an electricity reform law in 2001. Myanmar established a regulator in 1996. Philippines introduced an electricity reform law and established a regulator both in 2001, while Vietnam introduced an electricity reform law and established a regulator in 2001 as well. So most ASEAN economies today, they operate a vertically integrated power market with the participation of independent power producers. Only Philippines and Singapore still did have liberalized wholesale markets in place. Singapore's market is characterized by open access to its transmission and distribution networks, the separation of contestable and non-contestable market segments, with wholesale bidding market in place and full retail competition in theory. In Philippines, the wholesale electricity supermarket started its commercial operation in 2006 based on important market features like gross pool arrangements and locational marginal pricing. Some of the market concerns in the ASEAN electricity markets, especially those in the those with liberalized wholesale electricity markets, such as Singapore in particular, again, relates to the rising input prices, primarily natural gas. Okay, some retailers in Singapore were exiting the market as early as in October 2021 due to rocketing wholesale energy prices attributed to the increase in the gas prices, and eventually the retailers not being able to pass on the higher wholesale energy prices to customers due to lock-in contracts. Okay, so vulnerabilities pertaining to gas supply and gas prices facing liberalized electricity markets is not a new concept. Okay, did the market not listen to these wake-up calls? Well, we can think and reflect on that time and again. Papua New Guinea, on the other hand, is a developing economy in the Asia Pacific. The Papua New Guinea also operates a vertically integrated power market with the participation of independent power producers. Initiatives to restructure the electricity sector started in 2002. The Independent Consumer and Competition Commission ICCC Act of 2002 again led to the creation of an independent regulatory entity in theory. So interestingly, the PNG government released the National Energy Policy in 2016, which was eventually approved in 2018. And this National Energy Policy actually advocates the further reforms in the electricity industry, such as unbundling, promotion of renewable generation, and establishing an entire sector responsible for entire sector energy regulatory commission to achieve its ambitious electrification targets. Only an estimated 30% of PNG's 8.6 million people today have access to grid-connected electricity, and that is also primarily urban-centered. So the government, therefore, has set a target of 70% access to electricity by 2030, and actually relying on power sector reforms to achieve this target through the National Energy Policy. Now, the evidence tells us that mixing universal electrification with market-based power sector reforms is in itself a very are conflicting objectives. Okay, so moving along, Nepal, again a landlocked developing economy in South Asia, started undertaking reforms in its power sector since 1992 with the establishment of the Electricity Act and the Electricity Regulation Act. The market today is vertically integrated. The state-owned monopoly is the primary generator and distributor of electricity under the supervision of the government of Nepal. Okay, the power system size of Nepal Electricity Authority has actually grown from being a small system with to a bigger system today. Okay, so this power system size in terms of the installed capacity is growing over time, which is a good thing. Okay, but on the other hand, the former case of Papua New Guinea, that the PNG power system can still be considered to be a small power system. The Electricity Tariff Fixation Committee was established as a regulatory body to review and approve tariff filings. So interestingly, the access to electricity in Nepal has remarkably improved and can be in fact considered as one of the successful story of electrification. Only 6% of the population remain without access in 2019. Okay, comparing to the statistics we have for 2000, where 81% of the population did not have access to electricity. So 3 government electrification policies are currently in force: the Rural Energy Policy Subsidy, the National Rural and Renewable Energy Program, and Rural Energy Policy. So it is also noteworthy for us to know that between 2007 and 2017, the country went through a massive electricity supply shortage that caused up to 14 hours of daily load shedding. However, power supply has significantly improved after 2017, and much of that can be attributed to good corporate practices. Okay, and yeah, the next few figures that we are seeing in front of us provides the evidence is around the improved power sector performance in Nepal's post 2016. Okay, we can see that after 2016, the decade-long losses the power sector was facing was eventually turned into net profits, and the system efficiency, the operational efficiency of the power sector also improved, with system losses declining, although fluctuating, and the net profit, the accumulation of net profits had direct repercussion on system expansion. So 735 megawatt of capacity was added in the fiscal year 2021-2022, and also the Nepal's export capacity to India is now currently also stands at 364 megawatt. Okay, through the Dhalkebar-Muzaffar transmission line. Yes, and these all improved outcomes in the power sector coincided with the appointment of an NEA insider as the as the managing director of the Nepal Electricity Authority. Okay, so certainly highlights the importance of good governance as a necessary element for improved power sector outcomes in developing countries, doesn't it? So, okay, so what have we learned so far? So this paper we published with Professor Turajima has just mentioned to all of us. So this paper published in the Energy Journal contains the important findings around what have we learned from reforms in developing countries. Okay, and this paper actually provides the background to this invited talk today, as Turaz highlighted earlier on. So in developed economies, ownership, unbundling, and competition in generation and supply drove efficiency through increased competition and reduced market power, and therefore resulting in lower prices. But the exhaustion of all possible efficiency gains, together with security of supply objectives and environmental objectives, have hastened the need to rethink and revisit electricity reforms. Okay, so in developing countries, electricity reforms have also contributed to reducing network losses and operational efficiency. However, political instability can be a major barrier to realizing the improved power sector outcomes as a result of the reforms that are implemented. Okay, so in countries like PNG, the IPPs are at great risk of running insolvent due to non-payments and delayed payments by the government. So even though cost-reflective pricing is implemented, cost recovery is never achieved by the vertically integrated state-owned utility. So in liberalized wholesale electricity markets today, the wholesale price formation is guided by the principles of the merit order dispatch. So once the market operator aggregates demand, supply is dispatched accordingly based on the least marginal cost of supply, right, to meet the demand, and the market clearing is done under an uniform auction arrangement. So what does that imply is all power plants essentially receive the same wholesale price. And so the low-cost generators eventually have the incentive to on profits under current wholesale market price permission process based on the merit order dispatch. So these plant profits, as you can see, can be divided into scarcity rent and infra-marginal rent. So, but then when there is a price cap, as we have in the many wholesale markets around the world today, some of the scarcity rent gets lost, okay, and that results in missing money. And missing money is actually a phenomena where the price signals do not provide adequate incentives towards long-term capacity additions, right? So the scarcity rate is actually is derived by owning the scarce capacity at the first place. So as because of the price capping, okay, so the full value of the capacity is not reflected in the prices, in the wholesale prices, and thereby resulting in missing money. And missing money is a real threat to reliability. But missing money events are actually increasingly frequent in wholesale electricity markets, facing increasing demand, growing gas shortages, and at the same time experiencing greater penetration of intermittent energy sources such as renewables. Of course, the wholesale price at day and night varies. During the day, there is an increased demand. Then during the night, so wholesale prices during the day are higher than during the night, right? In some markets, they explicitly factor in the cost of emissions into the wholesale prices. But there are markets like the one we have in Australia down under, where emission costs are not factored into the wholesale prices. And but then, the theory tells us that polluters pay principle is in fact desirable, but the practice is quite contrary here, okay? So, but then in many developing countries with vertically integrated power system, but where IPPs participate in the power market through power purchase agreements, they actually face many risks under this single buyer model arrangement. Okay, so single buyer has monopoly over transmission networks and over sales to final customer. Single buyer also chooses from various generators, and there are many risks evolving this market arrangements, such as currency risks, risks of non-payment, political instability and political uncertainty risks, management risks, technology and performance-related risks. So even though single buyer model allows customers to benefit from a competitive price for electricity without having to shop around, right? However, a risk is that they make customers less active, resulting in less retail innovation, entry, and choice. The idea is that successful power sector reforms such as restructuring will actually minimize some of these risks, particularly the management risks. And reform programs are also considered as instruments to open up external investment and financing to the power sector in developing economies that are mostly cash strapped, but at the same time investment hungry, right? So, okay, so the next question then is what now and where to from now? Now, Turaj has already nicely given us the UK experience, and what we can conclude from the UK experience is that there is an increased role played by the public sector in the electricity markets today than a year back or than in the past, okay, as a response to the crisis. Now, how about Australia? Australia actually undertook various short-term measures, and the radical measure that Australia adopted was to suspend the national electricity market for about a week in June, and that suspension was necessary because some of the suppliers were actually withdrawing the market because of the price cap in place, but at the same time the cost of electricity generation being too high. Okay, so the price cap was not cost reflective in that sense. So some of the suppliers were exiting the market, and so therefore the market generator was basically calling on the suppliers and asking them to supply based on a compensation arrangement. Such market arrangements proved to be unsustainable eventually, and hence the market was suspended. All right, so yeah, and please note that the price cap that exists in the Australian electricity market today is $300 per megawatt hour price. So what that means is once the cumulative price once the cumulative wholesale price reaches a certain threshold in any particular Australian state, okay, so this price cap is automatically triggered. Okay. All right, so and now the long-term solution that Australia is adopting is that it's not actually letting the crisis to waste, right? And it's actually thinking long-term. So there has been a first change in the national energy objectives in 15 years, recently leading to alignment of energy policy with climate policy. So ministers have agreed to gas market reforms. Ministers have agreed to give federal and state energy ministers powers to declare certain transmission lines as having national significance. So ministers have also agreed to include an emissions reduction in the national energy objectives, which was actually largely missing in the Aussie context. And these moves are all favorable because the current Labor government has a net zero target by 2050 and 43% emission reduction by 2030. So these moves will certainly facilitate the realization of these ambitious decarbonization targets, right? So, but the take-home message is that the governments are here to stay in the Aussie context for a foreseeable future. Now, what's happening in throughout the world? In Singapore, the Electricity Market Authority, which is the energy regulator, is actually tightening licensing requirements for electricity retailers in order to protect consumers against the risk of provider failures. You just heard from me that some retailers were actually exiting the market, but to prevent so, now there are tightened licensing requirements for electricity retailers. In Nepal, government policies to subsidize the electricity tariff for lower income households and LPG prices has helped to keep inflation manageable, okay, despite increasing global commodity prices. In Sri Lanka, the government is issuing work from home orders as a strategy to alleviate acute energy shortages and as well as prevent the day-long queuing for energy. Pakistan is shortening work week to relieve pressure from lengthy power cuts. In Bangladesh, we just experienced the world's largest blackout, okay, where power outages occurred for around 10 hours. So the government is actually suspending the use of diesel run plants to reduce costs for imports. As prices soared, while gas supply is also being rationed. In both Ghana and Cameroon, on the other hand, have been gripped by protests over fuel prices and shortages. In Argentina and Peru, surging energy costs have sparked strikes and demonstrations. From Ecuador to South Africa, fuel shortages and blackouts have plunged import-dependent countries into economic turmoil. So leaving governments to find out workable solutions, right, to rescue their economies from this crisis. So yes, governments are here to stay for a foreseeable future globally in managing the power sector affairs. So what are the conclusions that we can draw from today's talk so far then? Okay, so as Warren Buffett said, always invest for the long term. The crisis today actually offers the opportunity to reform the electricity sector in delivering the long-term objectives of decarbonization in particular, right? And you just heard the cases of the UK, Australia, all right? So the increased role of government today in that context is a welcome news. Public sector involvement heightens at times of market failures, and therefore is to be embraced and not to be scared about, okay? Increased role of the government in the market can be a channel to pursue ambitious decarbonization objectives, as in the case of Australia. Then, Would a more balanced role of government and private arrangements have averted the crisis? So that's a $1 million question, which we should be reflecting on today. Maybe what that also signals moving forward is that we need to rethink on how to balance the role of the government and market when it comes to the electricity sector. Also important that liberalized wholesale markets have control over of the strategic reserves that sets the price in wholesale electricity market, which is usually natural gas. Australia, UK, and Singapore reveals the need to revisit the gas reservation and export policy. In least developed countries such as PNG, pursuing universal electrification agenda through reforms eventually comes into conflict, right, with private sector incentives, and therefore requires associated policy and financial supports. And if you look at the case of Nepal, where electricity market reforms is carried out in conjunction with 3 supporting policies to electrification that seem to have worked. So other countries can also consider doing so. And that's it from me. So thank you so much for your attention. We are ready to answer any other questions, any questions you have. I don't think we have any questions in the Q&A, Taras. Have you spotted any?
No, there was just one comment about the presentation mode. In conclusion, well, one thing that I can add is that one of the things we need to sort of realize, having looked at this space for a number of years, especially sort of thinking about the reforms in Europe, it wasn't that long ago, maybe 15 or say a little bit more years ago, that the reforms in Europe were mostly about improving energy efficiency, integrating European energy markets, and improving the industrial competitiveness of the continent. So this was what the markets were designed. It was all markets were actually it was all about markets to deliver economic growth. But then gradually, with the emergence of environmental and then climate change objectives and so on, slowly, without recognizing sort of explicitly, we have moved into the direction of a sort of the target economies, targets in terms of the Green Deal and decarbonisation and 2050 sort of targets. So gradually we have moved towards that, and then we are trying to achieve that target by balancing the trilemma, the security of supply, affordability, and sustainability. And economic theory tells us that the markets don't deliver public goods, but all these 3 elements of trilemma, they have properties of public goods, and we know that public goods are under-delivered by markets. So this calls for an inevitable, very involved sort of role of government, but this hasn't been sort of acknowledged sort of explicitly in terms of, because the markets here, they become just an instrument of achieving these the targets that we have in mind. Now we have so we are in target economies. And we are also discovering, just the policy responses to the recent price changes or so. It gives us some cues about how to balance these the 3 elements of the trilemma, because this balance is not sort of given. It's an unstable one. As soon as the security of supply is challenged, we need to rebalance again that balance of and the trade-offs between these and so on. So it's a dynamic game and situation. So the governments are here to stay, and we see signs of increase the government involvement and also appearance of new sort of even bodies and so on. And nothing wrong with that. But if we recognize that we are actually entering a new sort of wave of reforms, or a reform of reforms is needed, to explicit recognition of it could be the start of having a more sober sort of discussion of where to go with these reforms going forward.
No, I absolutely agree, Turaz. I think before the crisis, the governments, despite recognizing the need for action to deliver the energy policy trilemma, they were just hesitant, right? But then once the crisis occurred, it has given them the perfect opportunity to intervene, and now, you know, the golden opportunity exists to not waste the crisis and in fact act together towards delivering that energy policy trilemma. So. Yeah, I think we have a hand raised by Sasha Lee. So Sasha, yes. Over to you.
Let me go ahead and give them permission to speak. 1 second.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Sasha, unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I just sent the messages in the chat. Actually, I'm from the Kyoto University. I'm a doctoral student. And my question is, I pretty agree with you, like the government could like balance more to like do the like more electricity reform now. But my question is like, how do you think about the like the party politics on the government's management? Because actually in Europe, actually they have already, like Europe countries, they have already like done a lot for many years to reform their electricity market and to increase more like their green energy, especially like Germany. But they're actually for now, I think we still need to do more. So that's my question. That's all. Thank you.
I can try this maybe my way. Ravindra first.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Please go for it.
Maybe we both end up answering it. This is actually a very good question, and in response, you know, I've been thinking about this for a number of years, and what I usually say is that if only we could take politics out of policy in when it comes to energy, we could actually do some great things. And then my colleagues sometimes say, you know, well, good luck with that. It is not going to happen. But then it really depends on which kind of country you are, and then what is the political culture and traditions or so. I mean, I have watched countries where the party politics is more adversary, and with sharp conflicts and so on. Every government that comes in place and they have some ideas for energy policy, the next one says, as soon as I'm in the office, I'm going to abolish all of that and so on. But in the past 3 years, having lived in Denmark, where you have a stable coalition of a number of small parties, that brings some stability. So of course there are elections and so on, but having coalition governments almost all the time, it brings a certain level of sort of stability to the policy decision making, and that is welcome, and that allows them to do certain things that some other countries, to be honest, they cannot do. And we have also, with one of my PhD students, we also looked at the role of government ideology in their interference in the role of independent regulation and their political allegiance and orientation. And there is political ideology, not only party politics, it has something to do with the way we go about interfering and involvement of the state and government in this sector. Very important area indeed.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Turad just answered, based on the Australian experience, and that is, I guess the influence of party politics on energy policy can be minimized if energy policy is explicitly linked to climate policy, because climate policy will not change even if the party politics change, right? So yeah, so I think that's one way to do so.
You have a additional question or a hand raised from Christian Stett. Shall I allow him to speak?
Actually, thank you very for your answers. I learned a lot. Thank you. That's all. That's all my question. Thank you.
I see.
Shall I allow Christian Stett to ask his question?
I see a comment. I see a question. Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I also see a question from Oscar. Yes.
Okay. Christian, go ahead. Just unmute. There you go.
Thank you for allowing me to intervene. Thanks a lot for this nice presentation, for bringing the topic, because it's becoming ever more important. What we already see governments and also at the EU level proposing all kind of caps, all kind of well, trying to get, for example, a part of the windfall profits. And those are, well, temporary and maybe emergency interventions, but the discussion starts moving towards, do we need maybe a more structural reform into, well, European power markets? We have in UK, RIMA, basically they started thinking about how can we maybe develop on what we have already in the market. And then also von der Leyen mentioned 2-3 weeks ago that maybe we need a structural reform in Europe. So I wonder, what's your thought about this? Do we see any low-hanging fruits? Like there's a lot of discussion about going from national markets to zonal markets, maybe moving towards more PPAs backed by the governments. We developed this market in 20-30 years. We added a lot of complexity. We developed them a lot, and still we probably need to do more. I wonder what's your thought on this? Where is the easiest way to act, if there is any? Thank you.
I can say I don't have the perfect answer to that, but it is absolutely a good question. I have come to a realization lately that when I listen to discussions among energy economists about the windfall and where is the windfall, you know, if you want to tax windfall, for example, that is being earned by some actors in the marketplace or so, the interesting thing is, first you have to find that money. Where is that money? So when you discuss, when you start thinking about the details of it, we realize that we have created some markets that we don't really understand exactly what is happening inside it. You know, so there is everybody. Ravindra showed that graph. You know, where we know there is a substantial windfall, but good luck finding it. Before anybody could imagine. I mean, that disappeared not only in among the actors in Europe, but also globally. I mean, we have created markets that we don't really understand. We don't have full overview in them. So some simplicity will go a long way. And also we have focused a lot in Europe in particular on integration of energy markets, but we still have many different types of economies, a number of different types of economies and energy sectors in Europe. As long as we have this heterogeneity, there will be difficulties at times of crisis for resource sharing and pain sharing and so on. Low-hanging fruits would be, the lowest hanging fruit, I would say, probably LNG capacity, build as much as you can. And then we sort of then we can take other challenges.
Well, thank you. That's clear. And also on the taxing windfall profits, I fully agree with you. It's not as easy as we would like it to be, and also there's not just day ahead. There's futures, there are bilateral contracts, and then the complexity keeps on adding and adding. So thank you for the comment.
Indeed.
So we have both a question from Oscar Valdez, and he is looking to speak. So I'll let him ask his question out loud, if that's okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to hear your comments on a couple of ideas. Much of the current crisis originates with disruptions in natural gas markets, how they become a political weapon. So long-term solutions should look at increasing natural gas supply from other sources and increase nuclear and renewable generation. That's one question. And the other is your comments on government interventions in electricity markets being as market friendly as possible, such as targeted subsidies rather than price caps that will distort incentives and create missing money. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Ravindra, shall I take the second one and leave the first one to you? Take a deep breath.
Well, I'm happy if you could answer both the questions. If you have an answer.
I have a half answer that we were discussing earlier today to the matter of especially the price caps in the market. I believe actually there is no such thing as no price cap in reality. We can talk about it, we can ask for it, we can demand it, and so on. But everybody knows in this highly sensitive market, there is no absolute no price cap. There is always one. And it's just somewhere out there that, and it will pop up when the time is right for it. So it cannot be that there is no limit to how much governments can wait and see for the market forces to deliver. It's just irresistible, the pressure. So it's not really. So everyone should accept that there is always a price cap. So it's not a question around that, but there is a question around the level of it. That can be discussed. And that can then, as we see in Europe, we are looking for the right level of and so on. That can be discussed, how low and how high it should be. That is something for economists, and some theory can help us and so on. But just saying no price cap will automatically bring a lot of investment. I'm not sure if that's a direct that translation will happen directly.
Yes, and I think the first part of Oscar's question was to do with why not develop low-cost baseload generation, such as nuclear? Well, if we rely on the existing wholesale market design, I think the wholesale market design inherently incentivizes, the development of this low-cost baseload generation, right? I mean, based on the merit order dispatch, but despite that, it's not happening, and probably, so where does that lead us to question? I mean, is the market functioning or not at the first place? Are the price signals appropriate or not? So then I think there is that natural role for the government to intervene and probably spend towards these technologies, probably. I mean, if you look at Australia today, we have the Labour government in place, but the opposition government, the opposition party, the coalition party, they are actually talking about developing nuclear power plants as a strategy for the future. So yeah, I mean, I guess what this crisis today has taught us is that no stone should be left unturned. So the bigger thinking should be around how can we ensure our future power markets are crisis resilient. Okay, so that's the sort of thinking we should be forming. So thank you. Yeah, does that answer your question, Oscar? So
yes, thank you.
Pleasure.
You have one additional question in the queue from Christian Romig, asking you to comment on when it may become appropriate to roll back these exceptional measures, and will it be possible to do so after months or even years with them in place? Forward gas curves suggest prices not returning to pre-crisis levels until 2024.
You want to go, Ravindra?
I'm actually reading the question, Tarad. It's a bit long. Yeah.
Well, I think the essence of it is that will it be easy to roll back these policies that are being adopted quickly these days?
Well, I guess yes, because these are discretionary policies, right? I mean that's being implemented at the moment. But I think the rolling back will, will be associated with some cost, I would say. So.
I think they will be challenging. I think going forward, if anybody tries to roll this back, you will have to be sure that they actually deliver the rolling back in terms of, again, going back to cost reflective pricing and removing subsidies. Because we know subsidies are easy to get used to, and taking them, if you want to take them back from people, you have to give something in return. It will need to be a different world from now, quite different world from now, before we can comfortably sort of go back. And then the question is, can we really go back to where we were? The thing is, technologies move, societies and our economies change. Sort of going back is not really an option most of the time. So we have to see where we are at that moment and where we can go forward. Coming back to what we have, it may not seem a very sensible or feasible option, actually. We may have to reinvent this sector and the governance and market framework around it. I don't know what that will look like, but it may need to be different from the present and also from the past.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Therese. Also, I would like to add that other macroeconomic factors like inflation, for instance, will also play a role in deciding whether these measures should be rolled back, and if not, when it should be rolled back, right? So, because I mean, the cost of living has gone up. Energy is a significant driver of the increased cost of living. So, yeah, well, it's the decisions are not just confined to the energy sector outcomes, but also, it depends on the broader macroeconomic picture, I guess.
I think that's it for the questions you have in your queue. Do either of you have any closing comments?
I have said most of what I had to say, Ravindra.
Well, I don't have much to add to that, other than the fact that the questions and the participations from the crowd today was very encouraging, and the questions were really great. And yeah, thanks to the participants for being here with us today. So.
And we would like to thank Touraj and Rabinda for an outstanding webinar. This webinar will be available on IAEE's website for future downloads. If you're not already a member of IAEE, we encourage you to join by visiting www.iaee.org. We thank you for attending, and I officially close this webinar.
Thank you very much.